lobsters have dominance hierarchies. They hardly have a nervous system at all, which is partly why they're studied quite extensively. And so they have a social structure and they understand it. Like if one lobster, if you're a lobster, which would be quite a shock to you if it happened, and you were fighting with another lobster and you lost, you would remember that, and the next time you saw that lobster you'd scuttle off somewhere else. And you'd know that, and all the lobsters in an area know who's top lobster and who isn't. And top lobster gets the best bloody place to be and the best food. So this dominance issue, this cultural issue, you know, the fact that we live in a social environment is far deeper than people usually consider, and it's also worth considering, and this is what you might think of from an evolutionary perspective. You know, you think of natural selection as producing evolution, right? Well, random mutation with natural selection. But here's something to think about, and Darwin knew this, but Darwin was really smart, and the biologists who followed in his footsteps, even up to now, have only expanded out a fraction of what he had to say. You know, he was very interested in sexual selection. Now, one of the things about human beings that's unique is that human females are picky maters. They're choosy. They're also sneaky because you can't tell when they're ovulating, and with many other female animals you know. So they have hidden ovulation and they're choosy, and they tend to choose men who are more successful in the dominance hierarchy. Well, there's a shock. I mean, if you have a choice, why not, if you pick someone who's at the bottom of the competence hierarchy, well, that's probably not going to work out very well for you. And since women bear the burden of reproduction, it's perfectly reasonable for them to search out someone who's going to be helpful. So productive, fair, generous. And you know, when you think of a dominance hierarchy, you might think, well, it's the powerful guy, the aggressive guy, say, that rises to the top of the dominance hierarchy, and that's not true. It's not even true among chimps. Like, you can get a chimp tyrant, but then what happens is other chimps gang up on him and tear him to pieces, and they don't do it nicely. They don't do it nicely. And the chimps that tend to maintain their dominance for long periods of time have a pretty wide network of friends, roughly speaking, with whom they engage in reciprocal interactions like grooming, and they actually pay a lot of positive attention to the female chimps, who have their own hierarchy, by the way, and to their offspring. So they're like baby kissing politicians. And so the idea that it's raw power that produces dominance is it's just wrong. It's wrong now, you know, tyrants, you know, it's pretty damn unstable business being a tyrant. There's lots of people who want to kill you. Plus, you know, you tend to rule over something approximating hell. So maybe that's better than being a subject in hell, but it's not much better. So anyway, so this social. Now, so what this means, think about this for a minute. So imagine, you know, imagine that what I'm telling you bears some vague resemblance to the truth. I think there's quite a lot of evidence for it from a biological perspective. I mean, this choosy mating thing occurs with lots of species, you know. There's this bird called the bowerbird. You got to look up bowerbirds, man. Those things are, you just can't even believe they exist. And so the male bowerbird, he makes this really complicated nest that's close to the ground. He weaves it. It's really quite nice. You couldn't make one. So, and then he sweeps the yard in front of the nest, and then he runs around the forest, or flies, because he is a bird, finding pretty things. So maybe he'll find a nice collection of red leaves, and so then he'll take the red leaves one by one and fly back to his front yard and make a little square. You know, he's a bird, so it's not a great square, but he makes a little patch of red, and he takes a look at that, and then he goes off and finds something blue, and he decorates. He makes a little piece of abstract art in the front of his nest. And a lot of male bowerbirds do this all at the same time. And so then the females come along, they hop on something nearby, and they kind of look at it like this, checking it out. And if they're happy with it, well, then things proceed. But if they're not, they fly off to someone else's piece of abstract art. And if a male piece of art is rejected by like 3 females in a row, he gets irritated and brushes it all off with his wing, and then he makes another one. It's like, God. Well, they obviously have a very well developed sense of beauty. It's so cool, you know. And I guess the idea is that who knows what the hell the idea is. The female birds like artistic males, something like that, but if you're thinking about it biologically, maybe it's an indication of intelligence, right? It's a marker of intelligence. You know, and it's certainly the case that female humans prefer creative men. So, and no wonder, of course, we wouldn't be creative if that wasn't the case. So then imagine that there's two primary forces of evolutionary selection operating on us, and they're not really the natural world, which is what people always think, like the environment, you know, the animals and the trees and nature. But it isn't nature that selected us. It's two other things. Well, partly. It's two other things. So one is the dominance hierarchy. The male dominance hierarchy is one of the primary mechanisms of selection. So it's like, well, women are faced with a hard choice, which guy to go after, right? That's a hard choice. Well, so they do the same thing that people do with the stock market. They outsource the cognitive problem, the computational problem, to the male dominance hierarchy. Then they just let the males sort themselves out, however they're going to, and then they peel from the top. And so what that means is the male dominance hierarchy itself is a selection mechanism, because if you fail at it, then you don't leave any offspring. And so what that means, at least in part, is that we have adapted to be better and better at attaining status in dominance hierarchies over God only knows how long a period of time. And that doesn't mean just power. You know, it might mean cognitive flexibility, because you could imagine dominance hierarchy A, dominance hierarchy B, dominance hierarchy C. Okay, so if you're really successful, you climb up dominance hierarchy A. Right, but you'd B and C, no, if you happen to land in those, you'd just be a failure. So then you could say the ideal human being is someone who can climb to the top of a dominance hierarchy no matter what the dominance hierarchy is.